What a beautiful way to begin. Thank you, Bell Choir. I have a quick announcement before we get started. Somebody left a hearing aid, I think, out in the narthex on the table. So if you're having difficulty hearing me, it might be you. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Debbie Duval, and I am the pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, where Pam worshiped with her daughter Quinn as often as she was able. I want to thank the Reverend Oscar Wallace for sharing his pulpit with me today. On behalf of the Gormley family and this congregation, I want to thank you for gathering today to honor and remember the life of our friend, colleague, church member, wife, mother, and grandmother, Pam Gormley. We are here today to remember Pam well, to celebrate her life, to give thanks for who she was, and to honor her memory in ways that fit the shape of her life and the values that she held dear. This is a day for grief, but is also a day for gratitude, for laughter, for story, for music, and for love. Pam was the daughter of a church organist, and she herself was a musician. She sang in many choirs over the years, mostly church choirs, and she loved hymns deeply. Hymns were not just music for Pam. They were a centering rock of her faith. They were a way of praying, remembering, and grounding herself in God. And because of that, we are going to begin our service today with a hymn sing. So rather than a single opening or gathering hymn, we will sing together several familiar hymns, one verse each, and you are invited to sing as you are able. Sing out loud, sing out proud, sing softly, confidently, or hesitantly, or simply just listen and let the music carry you. There is no right way to participate. So our first hymn, all of your hymns you're going to find in your hymnal. And our first one is number 64. Again, each one is listed. Oh, okay. Number 51, I apologize. All creatures of our God now sing. You may be seated. I see Pam smiling as boldly and beautifully as she is on the front of your bulletin right now with all those beautiful hymns. Good job, everyone. Let us be in the spirit of prayer together. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for the gift of Pam's life. We thank you for her love and her friendship, and for the many ways she showed up for others, and for the countless contributions she made to this community and to our lives. God, we thank you for the laughter, for the music, for the antics, and the stories that still live among us. And God, we thank you for a life lived with energy, conviction, and heart. We gather today in grief and in sorrow, and also in camaraderie and friendship, as we mourn the loss of our dearly beloved Pam. Hold us as we carry the weight of that loss. Help us to make space here for tears, for laughter, for memories, for silence, and for song. Be present with us in this time. Let your Spirit move among us as we remember, as we give thanks, and as we entrust Pam and one another into your care. Amen. Friends, I invite you now to join me in the responsive reading of this beloved 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness. For his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm going to now invite you to rise in body or spirit and join me in singing Be Thou My Vision, which I think is number 455? 445 in the hymnal. seated.
Every few years, once a week, for the last some years, Pam and Phyllis and I would meet Pam for lunch. She always drove, so we went to where she wanted to go. That worked. As most unlikely ladies who lunch. We had a lovely time, always, and Pam's stories were always the best. Here are 2 Bible lessons her family has chosen that describe how Pam lived her faith. I'm going to start with the Old Testament from the book of Micah, chapter 6, verses 1, chapter 6, right, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? I shall give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God.
Another bit of scripture that really spoke to Pam and that Pam lived out is found in the book of James. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Surely that faith cannot save, can it? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So by faith itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from works, and I by my works will show you faith." Pam lived that. She's still doing it. I can just see her. She's working, she's organizing. She is walking humbly, and she is laughing with our God.
Start by saying I am totally astounded by this music. I'm mostly deaf, but it's coming through loud and clear. I'm channeling it for Pam, and I'm sure she's enjoying every bit of it. Good afternoon. By the way, if I'm too loud or too quiet, just say, Alexa, louder or something. Good afternoon. Pam would be so honored and humbled by this community turnout for this afternoon service, and so am I. Thank you. You are the community she cared about so much. You're the very people who supported and encouraged her efforts to bring a state-of-the-art library that quickly became a vital hub for this town and village and beyond. It was her proudest achievement, but she would quickly add that she did not do it alone. Many of you were crucial to its success and continue so today. Thank you for keeping it up. But Pam didn't stop there. She devoted her energy and time to the schools and theaters and businesses that in the Twin Villages. But it was her deep spiritual faith that brought her and our family to this church in 1994. After meeting the late Bruce and Margaret Bartlett at the front door of this on our first visit. Our two kids came here as toddlers and learned and embraced the teachings and example of Jesus Christ as they grew up. And Pam took me, an atheist, she took me by the ear and encouraged me to consider the incredible wisdom and power of Jesus Christ's teachings. And for me in particular, the Sermon on the Mount. Because of his loving wisdom, I soon became convinced that we can only succeed as a species on this planet until we can build a world where children's needs are absolutely paramount. It's as simple as that. And even though I'm a Christian atheist, Pam also encouraged me to become a deacon, which I did for a couple of years, and even a substitute Sunday school teacher once or twice, if you can believe that. I don't think I did too much damage. But Pam was never able to get me to participate much in the choir programs here. Consider yourselves lucky. Meanwhile, Pam, KJ, and Quinn became fully immersed in the music programs here. They loved it all and made music a vital part of their spiritual lives to this day. Pam gets the lion's share of the credit for our kids' success. KJ will become a doctor in May at CHICOM, the Kentucky College of Osteopathic Medicine. KJ's spouse, Ian Clapp, is also about to earn their medical degree there, doctor degree, at the same time in May. They were married last June, just in time for Pam to witness that event. Ian's mom, January Clapp, made the trek north from their home in North Carolina to be here with us today. They didn't know Pam for long, but they formed a wonderful bond with Pam and me, and we love them to bits. Meanwhile, Quinn is studying for the ministry at Chicago Theological Seminary. She was recently appointed chaplain at the Maine Medical Center's Biddeford Hospital. I have come to understand that chaplaincy is a complex and often heartbreaking profession. I don't know how it's done. I don't understand how she does such good work with people in their darkest hours. Meanwhile, Quinn's husband, Ezra, will also earn his master's in social work degree at the University of New England in May. He will establish a private social work service after that. I'm thrilled his parents, Sue and Jonathan, are also here today. Their friendship over the last decade has meant the world to Pam and I. And finally, our newest family member, Terrence, who Quinn and Ezra officially adopted last summer, again in time for Pam to celebrate the event with us, started college this fall, studying art and design. And I've seen his stuff, and this kid's got some talent. That's all I have to say. But thank you, Pam. Thank you for being so patient and loving with me. A day won't pass without thinking of you. I love you, hon. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really not how I hoped to be standing at this pulpit again. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces. I think the most absurd thing Pam Gormley ever said happened sometime during my junior or senior year of high school about 16 years ago. Yet another one of my friends had been invited to dinner and had awkwardly, apologetically bowed out. And we were faced once again with having the same conversation with her, the one where we tried to explain to our mother that our friends found her completely terrifying. That her accomplishments, her ambition, and her sheer force of presence could be intimidating, and that people often didn't know how to say that to her. And she listened carefully, as she does, and then with complete sincerity, absolutely no sense of irony, she uttered a sentence I will never forget. "I don't know what you're talking about. I am just a simple Christian woman." Like many moments in our lives with her, that was one of the times where we knew that Pam Gormley was, to put it nicely, full of shit. Over the last few weeks, as condolences and memories have poured in, it's become very clear that you all experienced her a bit differently than she experienced herself. Words we've heard again and include phrases like force of nature, absolute legend, the Queen of Damariscotta, and my personal favorite, a comment on a Facebook post, a walking hurricane of accomplishment. Pam Gormley was never just anything. She also loved a good story, and she would remind us, citing her Celtic forebears, that one should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And so we hope to honor that tradition today as we share a few reflections on the life of a very complicated woman. And I simply say now, please know she passed on many wonderful values to KJ and I, brevity not among them. Pam would insist until the very end that she was a city girl. She was born and raised in the Bronx near 183rd Street in a 2-bedroom walk-up where her grandfather was the superintendent. She grew up sharing that apartment not just with her parents and siblings, but frequently with grandparents as well. And whenever KJ or I complained about space or money growing up, she would cheerfully remind us that when she was a kid, they quite literally had to hot rack their beds. She moved out of New York by the time she was 20, but New York never moved out of her. This was evident in her accent whenever she was tired, her stubborn loyalty to the Yankees, and her insistence, even after more than 30 years living in rural Maine, that the Red Sox were devil spawn. She was the second of 5 children. Her father was a milkman and later a gas station owner, and her mother worked retail and played the church organ and ran the household. Pam excelled in school. She graduated near the top of her class at an all-girls high school with 3,000 students. She took on every opportunity she could, academically and otherwise, always reaching for more. As a teenager, she desperately wanted to be a marine biologist. And that dream led her to apply for and receive an internship at the New York City Aquarium. At the age of 16, she already had her scuba license, and her job at the aquarium included cleaning out the beluga whale tank. For those of you unfamiliar with that particular career path, this involved scuba diving into the tank and scooping whale shit into a bag underwater while serving as entertainment for the whales, who would like to sneak up behind her and blow bubbles in her face to scare her. It was the best job she ever had. She never stopped talking about it. She applied to the only university at the time that both had a marine science program and accepted women, the University of Alaska at Anchorage. And she was accepted with a scholarship. And in a story that would unfortunately repeat throughout her life, opportunity fell apart in the face of family need. And just before she was set to leave, her family hit a period of hardship and needed the money that she had saved. And so instead of boarding a bus across the country, Pam got a job at Reader's Digest, working overnight in the mailroom and then eventually the computer room, and put herself through college at the City University of New York over several years of working nights, earning degrees in mathematics and music. She would later say that no matter which way she turned in life, she was always somehow bound for Midcoast Maine.
I would credit myself with increasing my mom's view of the world through all of the trips we took together. But in truth, she had already been a world traveler by the time I showed up. Her sense of adventure and wandering foot was complemented by a lifelong wonder at the mysteries of the natural world and the humans that inhabit it. She began her journeys in 1972 after graduating high school, when she and some friends flew to Europe for the summer, bought a car, and drove it from one end of the continent to the next, punctuated by the Munich Olympics. Whenever she recounted the Olympics, she usually glossed over the more historically relevant moments and instead told of how, lacking a ticket to the opening ceremony, she simply scaled a flagpole and held on to the crossbars to watch, and then she stole the flag on the way down. The flag is in our house somewhere. You gotta believe me on that. All 70 feet of it. When we were writing her obituary, we tried counting countries she'd been to, but it got tricky because of the USSR, so it's around the ballpark of 25, definitely 5 continents. It's rare that someone so comparatively close to their formal retirement just 6 years ago would have such a checked-off bucket list, but Pam was always an overachiever. She found people and the variations in how we live to be fascinating, always finding some niche element of the daily lives of residents of wherever we were to hold on to. What did she remember best about Machu Picchu, one of the wonders of the New World? That the street dogs had friends to roam around Cusco together. In Amsterdam, we saw thousands and thousands of tulips, but she mostly would reminisce about basically the equivalent of a Netherland Five Below that she really liked. A huge trip to Jerusalem in 2019 was impactful to her faith, but to hear her tell it, you would think that the only thing in all of Palestine was the olive wood store outside the cathedral in Bethlehem. Barcelona, not the Sagrada Familia, but engaging in broken Spanish with the local baker every morning. It was the small quirks more than the big moments and have-to-see sights that she found important in travel. I really can't emphasize the broken nature of that Spanish. Her love of the natural beauty of the world was fulfilled by trips to Alaska, to Norway, to countless national parks, and to vistas seen from over 4 decades of trains, planes, buses, and automobiles. But she also indulged her sense of wonder and her love of the ocean when she became a scuba diver, already mentioned, a passion that we would later share as I picked up my own license in my wanderings. She still had the scar from where a Portuguese man of war lost a fight with her and retained a healthy respect for sharks her whole life. It was a rare vacation or trip that we took together that didn't somehow involve the ocean. I think the most serene I ever saw her in my life was on Grand Manan Island, sipping tea on a bakery's porch overlooking the water, contemplating which jam to add next to the scone. One of her favorite aspects of natural beauty were her favorite animals, elephants. So much so that after she retired from Skedumpa in 2019, she took herself on a 6-week road trip in order to see all the elephants I can. She liked that they were matriarchal. She loved to watch toddler elephants learn trunk motor control. And I think she saw much of herself in them.
Pam came of age as a woman at the height of second wave feminism and the civil rights movements. Both mattered to her deeply. From early on, all the way until the very end, she was a troublemaker in the best sense of the word. In high school, she led a coalition of students who fought for the right to wear pants. They staged sit-ins, and as she loved to remind us later, they burned skirts because bras were expensive, honey. After several months of disruption, they won the right to wear slacks. The principal was so upset about this, he canceled prom, a fact she never quite got over. Pam was a young woman in the years before Roe became the law of the land and was quite pissed when it ceased to be. Abortion was legal in New York City, but not in New York State. Later in life, she would tell us quietly how she loaned out her student ID from the New York City school system to friends from outside the city so they could access this essential care. It's not something she bragged about. It was something, as she often thought, that was simply required of her. She believed fiercely in women's autonomy and just as fiercely in women's ambition. In her corporate life, she'd tell us that she refused to learn how to make coffee so that when the men she worked with, who thought she worked for, wouldn't expect her to make it for them, she'd say, "I'll learn how to make it when I retire." And if any of you have visited her home in the recent years since she retired, you'll know even Pam was not good at everything. One of her favorite phrases, especially when KJ and I were kids, in her attempt to inspire ambition and leadership in us, she would often just remark, "You always want to be queen. It's best to be queen." And I will admit, I may have taken that advice a little more literally than she intended. By the time I was 3 or 4, I think our mother had adjusted her expectations to the reality that her children were going to be, shall we say, fruitier than she imagined. She did not always have the right language, and at times, especially for me, she was deeply afraid, not of who I was, but for my safety, living openly as myself in a rural community, with few examples at that time of what a good possible life might look like. But I never doubted for a second that she loved us, or that she was proud of us for being exactly as we are. By the time I was 10, she had prepared herself and was maybe even a little excited for the prospect of raising a gay son. There was never really a coming out conversation. It was apparently, in her words, really obvious, Quinn. When she eventually gave me her version of the talk, it was really quite simple and only about boys. She said, "Quinn, boys are stupid. Find a good one, keep your dignity." I have found that advice to be remarkably useful. After a long parade of people I brought home, none of whom she liked, she met the last one about 6 weeks into Ezra and I dating after we dropped him off from meeting them for the first time. She pulled me aside and said, "Quinn, marry that one." Her friendship with my husband, which involved them going on dates to Disney movies together whenever there was a new one, has been one of the greatest joys of my adult life. And so, too, was the fact that Ezra and I are married, and we're married on our parents' 37th wedding anniversary. Although it took her time to catch up with the exact shape of who I was becoming, I do have childhood memories of her packing my favorite purple tutu for family camping trips, and of never making me feel ashamed of who I wanted to be or what I chose to wear. And at a time before anyone knew what these words were commonly, she would cart me down to Portland for access to a rare doctor offering affirming care for people like me. And when she eventually did come to understand what I was saying, she did not look away. She took it upon herself to teach me about womanhood in all the ways that mattered to her. She taught me about the importance of a properly fitted bra and a deep brand loyalty to Lane Bryant. She taught me that confidence and comfort and knowing your inherent value mattered far more than grace or composure, which she considered optional at best. She believed that being a good woman was not terribly important in this world, but that being a great woman was. For her, that meant balancing ambition with compassion for yourself and for others. It meant occupying space without apology. And it meant understanding, as she reminded me more than once while I cried in front of her mirror early in my transition, that there are worse things in life than looking like your mom. Indeed, I am profoundly grateful for that. There were a few parts of womanhood that Pam loved more than being a mom. KJ will talk later about the many efforts she undertook to become a parent, but I will say this. The day after I was born, she was given a terminal cancer diagnosis. She was told she had months to live. When the doctors suggested she get her affairs in order, she simply said, no. She worked hard to become a mom, and she intended to enjoy it, and she had nearly 32 more years after that moment. She understood motherhood not just as care, but as an obligation to safety and welcome and fierce love. In the years before it was clear that this community would embrace all of us, she insisted on protecting her children, her home, and this church as places where we could be fully ourselves. And she extended that welcome far beyond KJ and I. Our home was often a refuge for others who needed a family, people who needed to be seen and named and loved. Many of them I see here today. Many of them got to call her a second mother. I didn't really understand the sacrifices she made in motherhood until I began to understand them myself. After retirement, Pam discovered that she did not care for it much. It lasted just long enough for them to clean out one house and build the next one before she got bored. And then she decided to get another job, wanting to be, as she would often put it, a useful engine. She found herself leading another nonprofit called Housing Resources for Youth, which served unhoused teenagers who didn't qualify for other services and who needed safe, affirming homes where they could finish out high school and begin adulthood. About a year into that work, they had just expanded into the Lewiston-Auburn area where Ezra and I live, and she called me. She said, I have this 15-year-old who needs a placement immediately, and it has to be trauma-informed and safe and affirming. She wanted to know if I could think of anyone who might be a good fit. I asked her if this was some kind of joke. And 24 hours later, we met Terrence, who became our son and her grandson. After several years together, we were proud to adopt him this past summer. It was a moment of unbridled joy for Ezra and I, but I think deep pride for Pam, who I think loved being a grandmother even more than being a mom. About 9 weeks after her heart surgery in September of 2024, I had my own something long prepared for. And despite still being in the throes of recovery and frankly high as a kite, as she was for most of the last year of her life, she insisted that she had to come along with KJ and I and see me through it. And so she hopped in a car, which was not a simple task when you're recovering from open heart surgery, and came down to Boston with KJ and I and allowed herself to be carted around in a wheelchair, which she really hated. And the night before I went in, we shared a bed, and she rubbed my back like she used to when I was young, singing songs and praying to God in gratitude about just how thankful she was to have a daughter, even if it was not the one she expected.
I think that we can all agree that if Pam loved something more than her family or Diet Coke, it was a damn good story. This appreciation came in many forms, from the novels she read voraciously up until she passed, to beloved movie dates with Ezra, but the one that she and I shared was a particular love of theater. She was lucky in regards to the stage, beginning with a childhood in New York City that, though hardscrabble, did afford her opportunities to develop a love of the medium. From her, I inherit a deep passion for theater and the power of storytelling, but also for a good dance number and a catchy chorus. We wore out the tape of the Godspell soundtrack on backroads drives getting to Damascotta Lake State Park. She wasn't just a spectator or an appreciator of theater, but she rather spent a great deal of her energy of her adult life behind the scenes of many of Lincoln County's theater companies. At first, she pulled some stage mom duties, herding her own and other people's children behind scrims and through orange slice break lines like it was halftime at a Pee-wee soccer game. Depending on construction in the past decade or so, I honestly don't know, her signature might even still be on the walls of the dressing room at Lincoln Theater. She did make a few on-stage appearances in Carousel and The Sound of Music. The rosary from her nun costume was really confusing when we found it in her closet last week. She would also later produce several shows throughout our childhood. However, it is probably as a board member / powerhouse she is more remembered for, bringing together again her love of creative individuals with her talent for logistics and fostering dialogue. She was always torn between wanting to push the artistic envelope of the area with the practicalities of filling seats to help keep the stage lights on. Among others, she served on the boards of both Lincoln Theater and the Hartwood Theater Company, as well as going out of her way as library director to host productions within that space, often very invasively staged in the library atrium. She specifically asked me to brag here, so if you are not into theater, this is Insider Baseball, and you can tune in when Quinn starts talking again. She once backed a chair into Hugh Bonneville from Downton Abbey while we were at a restaurant in Stratford-upon-Avon. She saw Shakespeare, at least 3 productions at the Globe, and she saw Zero Mostel in Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, there you go. Together, we saw Sir Kenneth Branagh as the titular character in Macbeth at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City, where there was so much actual mud on the stage that there was a splash zone. And finally, she sat through several excruciating experimental monologues at a play festival in New York City in order to see her legacy of theater continue as my own, hopefully better piece was next on stage.
As KJ shared, Pam had a deep love of theater and the arts, and music was woven through her life just as deeply. When she talked about her hopes for motherhood, she did like to remind us that she had always imagined cheering on her children at football or soccer games. She wanted to be a sports mom, and we disappointed. Sports were really her first love in her adolescence, and when we were cleaning out the attic of the Damascotta house before they moved, KJ and I came across a set of football gear, including helmets and pads, the whole thing, and we assumed it must have belonged to a grandfather or an uncle. And when we asked our mom about it, she said very casually, "Oh, that's mine." She played all-city women's football in high school, and before you ask, she was a linebacker. She figured out fairly early that her children were not destined for athletic greatness, although she did invest a solid decade of Saturday mornings in hoping we'd become good figure skaters. But when she realized instead that we were bound more for music and the arts, she saw that and she leaned all the way in. Our childhood was full of museums and concerts, long walks through galleries where KJ and my dad would carefully examine every damn thing, while my mom and I would enjoy the highlights and then find an overpriced cup of tea in the cafe. She took us to orchestra concerts and followed classical music the way some people follow their favorite sports teams, cheering on performers, tracking careers, and bragging about who she heard live, which included performances under the baton of Leonard Bernstein and seeing Glenn Gould perform Bach. She heard, of course, Bach performed in her trips to Vienna. Looking back, I now understand our childhood coincided with a period of financial hardship. We didn't always have health insurance, and we ate a lot of frozen fish sticks and the same granola bars every day for lunch for 3 years, but we were never short on culture. When I was 13, during a major Beethoven anniversary year, she got the two of us tickets for the Boston Symphony Orchestra's complete cycle of all 9 symphonies, performed over 4 winter weekends. We took the Amtrak down together and we packed bologna sandwiches, but afterward we would go to the Cheesecake Factory, which felt very fancy to her. I still honestly don't know how she afforded those tickets. My suspicion is that she didn't, because that same year, her dear friend Bruce Bartlett, who was my confirmation mentor, got me tickets to the Portland Symphony Orchestra for the season, and I think he may have made it possible. Pam was an accomplished musician herself. Her mother was a church organist and passed those skills on to her. And our house always had a piano and often an organ. She was my first music teacher. On mornings when she had to drive KJ to school early for some program or another, she and I would sit in the front seat of the car with a tiny little toy keyboard. And she would teach me scales and music theory, explaining how every tune always wants to come back to C. She loved watching us perform. She took particular joy in us being percussionists, in part because I think it was almost like a sport. She was especially happy when I had to show her a diagram of the trading of instruments necessary for our symphony to get through a Mahler performance. Although she loved being an audience member, she also performed throughout her adult life, singing in many choirs in this community as an alto and frequently, when needed, as a tenor. But no musical experience mattered more to her than playing in the Handbell Choir, something she did for about 25 years. She would be so charmed to know that they are reunited today. She worked hard to master the 4-in-hand technique. She practiced constantly. Last night, while cooking soup for our family, I was reminded how she used to label wooden spoons with the notes of her assigned bells and practice her pieces that way at home. Our soup last night was made with E-flat. She believed in community music. She loved to complain about it, frequently coming home from rehearsal lamenting, "Quinn, why can't people just learn to count to 4? When she was 18, she was asked to move out of her family's apartment, and she lived in her car for several months while working overnight shifts at Reader's Digest. And when she eventually got an apartment, it took her over a year before she had a bed. And I asked her why it took so long. She explained to me that it's because the first piece of furniture she bought was not a bed or a table, but a piano. Because she would often say, "It is not home if there is not a piano."
There has been much written over the past few weeks about my mom's role as executive director of Scaramouche Library, a position that she held for over 2 decades. When she re-entered the workforce after raising Quinn for the first few years of her life, she started out as fundraising for the capital campaign to build the new library. It was to be a space that would bring the existing collection in the Dixon House into a facility which looked toward the future of libraries. The building was deliberately drenched in light and full of books, but also with flexible spaces that grew over her time there to encompass a myriad of roles, enabling the library to serve, as she called it, the community living room. Over the years, when she was there, it received many accolades, but its big claim to fame was the Institute for Museum and Library Science Award in 2008, a national-level honor granted to only a few libraries per year and more often to much larger facilities with more comprehensive public funding. She traveled to Washington, D.C. to receive that award at the White House. In what may have initially been a bit of nepotism, I held various volunteer and paid positions at Scaramouche from about 2004 to 2012 across many of the departments, before then going into a first career in library technology. So I was chosen to talk about her love of libraries and of Scaramouche in particular. Pam's love of libraries went back to her childhood, where access to free knowledge was integral to her education in New York City's poorest borough. This love, as with many things she loved, was shown both through advocating for the importance of libraries, but also a constant envisioning of how libraries could be better and improve. She brought a unique background to her executive directorship, as unlike most library directors, she did not have a master's in library science. However, her outside perspective enabled her to dream big, albeit sometimes weird, for her role. A non-comprehensive list of notable ideas for programming or items to lend were a bug-eating contest, fish painting, staging full-scale dramatic productions in the atrium, a constantly rotating quilt show, a town gown large piece chess game, bringing many live animals in for nature presentations and sometimes not for nature presentations, a radio station, lending out telescopes and ukuleles before it was cool, and I'm sure many more that people will remind me of after this service. This creativity was not necessarily from her own dreaming, but rather her deep appreciation for creative individuals and her remarkable ability to put interesting people into a room together and build the scaffolding so their dreams could become reality. Her favorite interview question for new hires was, "How many pianos are there in New York City?" Because she cared significantly more for how someone thought and engaged with problem solving than the substance of their resume. Her understanding of libraries as a gathering space as well as a celebration of knowledge was grounded in some quiet yet powerful understandings of equity and inclusion, where she walked the talk of making knowledge accessible to all. A career-long critic of some historical cataloging paradigms, she was sometimes wont to say, "F. Dewey," which wound up manifesting in a change to the shelving of the children's picture books to be by subject rather than author. This enabled countless parents to be able to quickly identify all the books about pigs that they had, or starting school, or talking about hard issues. She was fiercely protective of adolescent library patrons, up to and including personally keeping the library open on Monday afternoons so the teens would have a place to go after school for a few hours, as well as defending their right over and over and over again to have their own gathering space within the children's section. She was also a shrewd and successful fundraiser for the library, which during her tenure had to raise most of its funding from non-municipal resources. I cannot honestly tell you how many book art auctions, galas, ticketed invited speakers that I was voluntold to help out with growing up. And I did the math, and my letter folding count is more than 15,000 by the time I finished working there. Her championing of the necessary move of the secondhand bookshop to its current location helped retain an essential pillar of Scadumpha's fundraising stream, but also helped keep another bookstore open in a world with so many have closed down while tech giants increase their stranglehold on the publishing industry. As has been shown in the numerous articles and memorial posts about her time at Scadumpha, we could talk for hours about her tenure there, but she did do other things in life that we want to continue to honor, so I'll leave you with this. On the accessible pathway up to the front door, often covered by a mud rug and some ice, is a single commemorative brick that was installed sometime in the latter half of her service to the library. It says simply, "Pam Gormley, she made things happen."
Deep breath, we're almost done. Pam may have insisted that she was just a simple Christian woman. I think we've established the many ways in which that was not true. But to her credit, I will say there was a kernel of truth in that declaration. It was not possible to know her mother without knowing her faith. It was the defining, orienting force in her life. For the second half of her life, that faith lived here at Second Congo. Though she was not simple, her faith was. Her favorite Bible verse was Micah 6:8. and was often repeated in our home. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? I think she really preferred the justice and kindness to the humility part. I think she tried for all three. Pam was far more interested in the doing of faith than in believing the right things. That was part of what drew her to a tradition that valued service over certainty and encouraged questioning over rigid doctrine. Faith to her was something you practiced, not something you won arguments about, and she practiced it everywhere. While she was here, she played many roles. She chaired the deacons, which was one of her favorites. She served as the moderator and the treasurer and on the missions committee. She worked at the food pantry. She cooked countless Wednesday night suppers. She believed deeply that faith was best taught not by pompous men in pulpits, but by women in kitchens, doling out God's love in spaghetti sauce, garlic bread, and hard-boiled eggs. She also brought her irreverent sense of humor to her faith. One of her accomplishments as deacon was she convinced the church to reintroduce the use of actual wine in communion. And a friend to our pastor, Ken Dale, at the time, she decided to prank him a little bit, and on the first Sunday we served wine in this church again. She bought the wine, a bottle of Fat Bastard brand wine. I was later learned that Kendall drove all over the county that morning, clerical collar on, trying desperately to find a replacement bottle, only to be thwarted by Maine's still on the books blue laws. So the first Sunday we served wine again at this church, the body of Christ was accompanied by Fat Bastard. I hope that does not make it less valuable. She was pleased. Her favorite role here, though, may have been her teaching of the middle and high school Sunday school classes for a number of years. Pam Gormley teaching Sunday school was an event. She began with prayer and a Bible verse, and then turned the rest of the hour into debate and discussion, inviting young people to wrestle seriously with big questions of faith, and she made it good because she took young people seriously about their faith in a way few other people did. She almost never gave answers. Instead, when we were faced with moral dilemmas or uncertainty, she would return us again and again to that same question: what does God require of you? She was insistent that if young people were going to choose faith, it should be because it was right for them, not because they felt obligated or were born to it. As part of confirmation class, she made sure we explored other traditions. 1 weekend a month, she would load us into minivans, and she drove us to the Catholic service and the Episcopalians. We sat quietly, not as quietly as I think they are with the Quakers. We heard about the Mormons. We attended a Seder, and when she ran out of local options, she made us read about Islam and Buddhism and even atheism. She wanted us to choose this place, if we chose it at all, with open eyes. She lived her faith in community. She believed that God was encountered not in perfection, but in showing up again and again to care for one another, to be, as she liked to say, a useful engine. Her faith shaped how she loved and how she led and how she welcomed and how she fought for justice, including her insistence on this church becoming open and affirming. It shaped her insistence on safety and dignity for her children, for this church, and anyone who needed a place to belong. And in the end, it also shaped how she faced death, with honesty and courage, and without a regret in this world or an ounce of fear. Her favorite hymns playing in the background. For that gift of a faith that was lived well, questioned, and shared and practiced, I am most grateful to her.
I need you to know that it took 5 different organ systems hitting critical failure at the same time to take down Pam Gormley. I had the unique position of being the primary communication with her medical team in her last couple years of life while I myself was in medical school, so I thought I'd offer some perspective here. If cats have 9 lives, Pam Gormley had, at least at a conservative count, about 15. We could have had this whole service several times throughout her life had not medical advancements, sheer dumb luck, and her own stubbornness kicked in. She survived skin cancer, potential breast cancer, varicose veins that she hated, a frankly alarming amount of colon polyps, preeclampsia, and more. But I want to highlight 3 things: her diabetes, her kids, and the past couple years. Pam Gormley lived with diabetes for 50 years and still had feeling in all of her toes and completely functioning kidneys when she passed. Statistically, many of you in this congregation either live or have a loved one living with diabetes, so you'll understand the scope of that accomplishment. Caring for yourself when you have diabetes is a constant, relentless slog, physically, financially, and mentally. The medications are always changing, as well as your body's response to them. Insurance companies are the worst, to be nice about it. And you have to keep a running calculus of your sugar consumption all day, every day, your entire life. She rose to that challenge. At one point in the mid-2000s, when she began to become worryingly resistant to the insulin that she was taking, as a Hail Mary, she enrolled in the clinical trial for a new drug based off of Gila monster spit that would, in later versions, come to be known as Ozempic. There was a flip side to all of this constant self-evaluation. She once told me that since she was a young teenager, she started every Monday with a new diet plan. In a world where people sometimes have children they do not necessarily want, it is nice to know exactly how wanted my sister and I were. My mom was a daughter of a drug called diethylstilbestrol, which was widely distributed in the mid-20th century and then later pulled because it turns out it causes cancer, sometimes known as DES. It also caused, more quietly, a host of other effects that resulted in frequent miscarriage. I am my mom's first child, but 5th pregnancy, and Quinn is her 7th. Both of us had complicated, early, deeply hospitalized births that damn near killed her and us, but here we are. In medical notes, there are sometimes turns of phrase that practitioners use to give others on the team a heads up about what type of personality they're about to walk into. She nearly universally got very pleasant, the medical equivalent of a pleasure to have in class, and was well liked by the literal hundreds of people involved in her care. She also, however, generated some other comments that amounted to her doctors politely calling her a real stubborn piece of work. But it was also that tenacity to which they attributed her persevering existence and love of life itself. Out of all of the thousands of pages of notes I have read in the past year and a half, my favorite one still has to be a night nurse note. Patient is hallucinating about bananas, requests Diet Coke. Finally, I want to talk about the past year and a half. As many know, she had a triple bypass heart surgery in September of 2024. Her surgeon knew, she knew, and I knew that the odds were more of a flip of a coin that she would survive that operation. She did, but the following year and a half were a series of grueling complications from that surgery colliding with her other chronic conditions. The one upside is that we did have the blessing of time. Time to plan, time to make peace, time for her to see major life stones for her children and grandchild. During her longest stretches at Maine Med this past summer, Quinn and I became well acquainted with the palliative care team, whose tireless efforts brought her relief from pain, but also helped center her and our family to prepare for a good death, if there ever is such a thing. This crystallized what actually mattered to her to prioritize should the time come, and I can report that during her stay in hospice this month, she passed without pain, with family, and without regrets. We've spoken for a while now, and thank you for listening. I think it's clear that Pam Gormley, my mom, clearly got the bang for her buck out of life. A powerhouse, a lover of nature, a quiet champion for the underdog, a good Christian woman, truly a fully lived life. As with grieving anyone you love, she leaves a hole in our lives, but she also left a legacy of what it means to live life with purpose, faith, joy, wonder, justice, and love. Thank you again for attending this service.
was talking with Pam's good friend Jeannie a few days ago, and she shared that someone once said to her, "If you see Pam and Jeannie walking down Main Street, you better hide your wallets." Many of us knew and valued Pam for her leadership and her many contributions to organizations throughout this community, but if we are being honest, one of the greatest contributions she made was getting the rest of us to put our money where our values were and to support organizations that worked and showed up for our neighbors in need. We know that taking an offering during a funeral is a little unusual, but we thought, what a better way to honor our mother than to let her dress you down for your money one last time. This offering today is completely optional, and we had originally planned to donate it to the Newcastle Area Ecumenical Food Pantry. However, in light of ongoing events in our state, the other church home she had in Auburn, which holds the food pantry for much of Auburn and Lewiston and serves primarily immigrant communities, and which she loved dearly, is desperately in need of some assistance right now as a community is under siege. And so our offering today will go there. And thank you all.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for these gifts freely given. Bless them and use them for good, to feed our neighbors, to meet real needs, and to carry forward the values Pam lived by. In gratitude and trusting in your care, we now turn to pray and sing together as Christ taught us, a sung Lord's Prayer.
This is a poem by Cynthia Ryland and Marla Frazee. God went to India to see the elephants. God adores